Is the DJI Pocket 3 the best small consumer video camera you can buy this year? To find out just how good the Pocket 3 really is, today I'm going to do an in-depth comparison with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I think the best iPhone is a worthy opponent, because especially when it comes to video quality, it's definitely one of the best smartphones on the market. There are 12 categories and 1 point for the winner of each category. Today it's mainly about the video quality of these two devices. It is clear that these are two very different devices. The Pocket 3 in particular has a few special advantages and disadvantages due to its concept with the integrated gimbal. But more on that later. Let's start with the most important topic: image quality. The DJI Pocket 3 has a 1-inch sensor and an aperture of 2. It is interesting to note that the sensor can only take photos with a resolution of up to 9 megapixels. In comparison, the iPhone has 3 separate cameras, which also have different characteristics. The iPhone's best camera is the wide main camera, with a sensor of 1/1.28 inches and an aperture of 1.78. The iPhone's main camera has specs that are not that far off from the Pocket 3. The main camera of the iPhone 15 Pro Max has a 48 megapixel sensor, and on top of that, the iPhone has an incredibly fast processor, so it won't be an easy battle for the Pocket 3. That's for sure. The iPhone's Auto cameras, the ultra-wide camera and especially the telephoto lens can't quite keep up with the iPhone's main lens in terms of image quality. Let's start with the individual categories and begin with the most important category: colors, contrast and exposure. In other words, the look of the shot. As it is the most important category, only for this category there are up to 2 points. And you can see that there are significant differences between the shots from these two cameras. Both cameras take very nice shots. The iPhone does a certain amount of HDR processing internally. This is noticeable. It leads to an extreme dynamic range, which sometimes looks a little unnatural and digital. We'll take a closer look at the dynamic range in a moment. What looks great on the Pocket 3, of course, is the slightly blurred background when shooting people. This gives the shots a very cinematic effect and looks very high quality. This is also possible with the iPhone if you shoot with the main lens, but you are often a little too close if you hold the iPhone on a pole and film yourself. I also usually like the colors of the Pocket 3 very much. They look very natural and yet rich in contrast, and at the same time they have a very special look. What I also like about the shots from the Pocket 3 is that they look soft and therefore of high quality. They don't have an over-sharpened digital look. The iPhone's shots look more digital. These shots were all taken in the standard settings, by the way. Unfortunately, the Pocket 3 isn't perfect either. Although I usually like the skin tones, there are situations that the Pocket 3 doesn't handle well. For example, if the warm evening sun is shining in your face, the iPhone's shot looks much warmer. And that also corresponds to reality. After all, the evening sun is shining directly in my face. In very extreme cases, I look like a bloodless vampire in the Pocket 3's shot. As far as skin tones are concerned, I often prefer the iPhone. When the Pocket 3 tracks your face, it also tries to expose the face optimally. As a result, the Pocket 3's shot is often brighter than the iPhone's. Sometimes this can lead to an overexposed background. However, I don't see this as too much of a problem. In these cases, the shots from the Pocket 3 often look better. So overall, I prefer the look of the Pocket 3, but there is still room for improvement when it comes to the skin tones. 2 points for the Pocket 3, 1 for the iPhone. The iPhone's greatest strength in this comparison is of course the fact that it has 3 cameras and 3 lenses, and not just one. At 20mm, the lens of the Pocket 3 is visibly wider than the main lens of the iPhone. And this is also very useful for vlogging, for example. There is also a 15mm add-on lens for the Pocket 3, which is almost as wide as the ultra-wide lens of the iPhone. What the Pocket 3 lacks completely, however, is a higher focal length. The iPhone 15 Pro Max comes with a 120mm telephoto lens, and that can be very useful. You can get much closer to subjects. The iPhone can also shoot with a zoom factor of 2, so a focal length of 48mm with almost no loss of quality. That is also very useful. The digital 2x zoom of the Pocket 3, on the other hand, is not recommended, as it leads to a greatly reduced image quality. And of course, there are also a number of additional lenses available for the iPhone. This point clearly goes to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I have already said that the iPhone performs a certain amount of HDR processing. This leads to an extremely high dynamic range. Even the best sensor can't keep up with that. Even if the iPhone's image sometimes gets a somewhat artificial HDR look, it protects the highlights visibly better overall than the Pocket 3. The dynamic range category goes to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. If you want to get a better dynamic range, and especially if you want to edit the colors of your shots, you should use a lock profile. Both cameras offer such a lock profile. However, the iPhone only offers it in combination with ProRes, which limits its usefulness somewhat. Even if ProRes does offer advantages, it results in an enormous amount of data and is really only recommended for professional purposes. Surprisingly, log on the iPhone does not have a better dynamic range than the standard video mode, as log does not use HDR processing. Instead, you get a somewhat softer and more cinematic image that is well suited for color grading. On the Pocket 3, it is noticeable that the camera no longer completely adjusts the exposure to the face when shooting in log. This can lead to underexposed shots when vlogging, for example. By the way, I use the manufacturer's conversion LUT for both cameras. The colors of the Pocket 3 also look a bit more cinematic here. The dynamic range of both cameras in the log profile is very similar, albeit with a slight advantage for the iPhone, which preserves the details in the dark areas a little better. Both cameras also have a profile with higher brightness levels that is suitable for an HDR-capable screen. On the Pocket 3, this is called HLG. On the iPhone, it is called HDR Dolby Vision. Overall, this is a point for both cameras for me, although with a slight advantage for the iPhone. It's difficult to compare the details of shots from two lenses that don't have the same focal length. Nevertheless, when zoomed in, you can see that the Pocket 3 also delivers a very detailed image with only slightly less detail than the iPhone, despite the slightly wider field of view. A lack of detail is therefore not a weakness of the Pocket 3. 1 point for both cameras. What is a clear weakness of the iPhone, however, are slow motion shots. For some inexplicable reason, the iPhone is not able to take slow motion shots in 4K. This is only possible in 1080, and the image quality is correspondingly poor. This is much better with the Pocket 3. The Pocket 3 can take slow motion shots in 4K at 120 frames per second, and the recording quality is excellent. 1 point for the Pocket 3. A particular strength of both cameras is shooting in low light. With the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you should definitely use the main lens in low light, as it clearly offers the best performance in low light conditions. And as you can see here, the iPhone can keep up relatively well with the Pocket 3, even though the Pocket 3 has the larger sensor. Nevertheless, it is noticeable that the Pocket 3 takes the nicer and more detailed shots in low light. By the way, the Pocket 3 has its own shooting mode for low light, and apart from the pure image quality, it has another advantage. The gimbal is a great advantage in low light when there is a lot of movement. In low light, the iPhone's electronic image stabilization can no longer work as efficiently. Although the iPhone 15 Pro Max also has optical image stabilization for the main lens, it naturally cannot keep up with a gimbal. Especially in low light, the shots of the Pocket 3 are therefore much better stabilized. Overall, the low light category goes to the Pocket 3. It's time to take a closer look at the stabilization. Can the combination of optical and electronic stabilization of the main lens on the iPhone keep up with the Pocket 3's gimbal in good lighting conditions? No is the answer. In a direct comparison, you can see very clearly that the Pocket 3's recording is much better stabilized. This also applies when shooting with the ultra-wide lens on the iPhone. Even the ultra-wide lens of the iPhone cannot compete with the Pocket 3. The recording of the Pocket 3 is even more stable than a recording in the action mode of the iPhone, and I would rather advise against using the action mode. It leads to a strong crop and greatly reduced image quality. This point clearly goes to the Pocket 3. Depending on what you want to capture with a camera, the maximum possible recording time may be of interest. Battery life and possible overheating play a role here. I did a test here in the office at 21 degrees Celsius in 4K 60. Neither device had any problems with overheating under these conditions. The Pocket 3 shoots in 4K 60 for 1 hour and 45 minutes. The iPhone still has a battery capacity of 55% after more than 2 hours of recording. The battery handle included in the Creator Combo can extend the runtime of the Pocket 3 by up to 62%, but if a long battery life is very important to you, then you should rather go for the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Both cameras produce a blurred background when the subject is in the foreground. This is one of the reasons why both devices need a good autofocus. The iPhone's autofocus generally always works perfectly. I've been filming with the iPhone 15 Pro Max for a long time, and I've never had any problems with focus hunting. And I've only very rarely noticed this with the Pocket 3 either. In this direct comparison test, it is noticeable that the iPhone reacts slightly faster, especially when the subject leaves the scene and the focus returns to infinity. Even in backlit situations, the autofocus usually works very well on both devices. So it is impossible for me to determine a clear winner here. 1 point for both cameras. So let's take a quick look at the audio quality of the built-in microphones. Of course, I would recommend an additional external microphone to anyone who vlogs frequently. For the Pocket 3, the new DJI Mic 2, for example, would be a great choice. However, other external microphones can also be connected to the Pocket 3 via USB-C. And of course, there are also various options for the iPhone 15 Pro Max. My main problem with the iPhone when vlogging is simply that you can't check the framing when filming with the back camera. So what do you say? Can you hear a big difference? What the Pocket 3 does much better in the audio comparison is that the background noise is suppressed much better. Wind noise, for example, is barely noticeable. On the other hand, the voice sounds much clearer on the iPhone, and the recording is also slightly louder. Overall, it's a draw for me. On the Pocket 3, you can set the exposure completely manually, and you can also control the noise reduction or the sharpness of the shot, for example. All this is only possible on the iPhone with a third-party app. The standard camera app does not allow manual exposure settings. Instead, the iPhone allows you to shoot in ProRes, an almost lossless codec that is very suitable for editing. However, ProRes also leads to gigantic amounts of data, and with the cinematic video mode, the iPhone has a recording mode that artificially creates a blurred background. However, I never actually use this mode because it usually looks very unnatural. And the iPhone of course has a macro mode with which you can get very close to subjects. The Pocket 3's gimbal, on the other hand, enables a range of features, such as auto tracking or particularly smooth camera movements. You can only achieve this with the iPhone in combination with a good smartphone gimbal. But the gimbal also makes the Pocket 3 very fragile. The device can hardly be protected from water or sand. And we still have to talk about the display. The Pocket 3's display isn't too big, but if you're filming yourself, it's obviously a huge advantage. In these comparison shots, I kept missing the framing with the iPhone, because I could never really assess how I should hold the iPhone correctly. On the other hand, if you're not filming yourself, then the much larger display of the iPhone is an important advantage. For example, you can judge much better whether a subject is in focus or not. Which is more useful for you now depends very much on your needs. Overall, I also give both cameras 1 point in this category, and so the Pocket 3 wins with 10 to 9 points. The Pocket 3 currently costs $519. You can use the link in the video description to check whether there are any current offers. The iPhone is of course much more expensive. They are both fantastic devices for video recording. For vlogging, I would go straight for the Pocket 3. In all other cases, you could save the money for the Pocket 3 and invest it in a new iPhone, whereby the iPhone is of course much more than just a video camera. Give me a like as feedback if you found the video interesting. There will be more videos about the Pocket 3 and the iPhone 15 Pro Max, so stay tuned and see you next time.